For more than 30 years, the city of Wichita, Kansas, knew the name BTK, but not the man behind it. He murdered 10 people and then disappeared into an ordinary life. A husband, a father, a churchgoer with a steady job and a neatly kept lawn. He was never on a suspect list, and after years of silence, he came back, not because anyone was closing in on him, but because he wanted the police to remember him. He was not caught because a detective finally outsmarted him. He was caught because he asked the police one question and trusted the answer they gave him. This is the complete file on Dennis Rader. It begins on the morning of January 15th, 1974. In a quiet neighborhood in Wichita, inside a single-story house on North Edgemore Street, 4 members of the Otero family are killed. Joseph Otero, a former Air Force man, his wife, Julie, and 2 of their children, Josephine and Joseph Jr., who never made it to school. That afternoon, 3 of the surviving Otero children come home and walk into a scene no child should ever see. The police arrive to something they cannot explain. There is no robbery that makes sense of it, no grudge, no connection anyone can find between this ordinary family and whoever did this. For a while, detectives even hold the wrong men, chasing leads that go nowhere. What no one understands yet is that this was not chaos, and it was not personal in the way they keep looking for. It was planned. The man who did it had chosen this family, watched the house, cut the phone line before he stepped inside, and brought his own tools. He had been rehearsing it in his head for a long time. This was not the end of something. It was the beginning of a 30-year nightmare. And the man who did it was on the surface, the last person anyone would ever look at. Dennis Rader was an Air Force veteran. Married, with 2 children, a son and a daughter, he raised in a tidy house in the suburb of Park City. For years, he made his living in a job with a quiet, terrible irony to it. He installed home security systems for a company called ADT, which meant that frightened families, some of them frightened by BTK himself, invited him into their homes to help them feel safe, and showed him exactly how their locks and doors worked. Later that chapter ended, and another began. He became a compliance officer for Park City, the local official who enforced the small rules, measured the height of your lawn, and dealt with stray dogs. A petty authority who took his power over his neighbors very seriously. He was a Cub Scout leader. He became president of the council at his Lutheran church. To the people around him, he was rigid, a little pompous, obsessed with order, and completely unremarkably normal. That gap between the man everyone saw and the man he actually was is the whole horror of this case. He did not hide in the shadows. He hid in plain sight, as one of us. And unlike almost any killer before him, he could not bear to do it in silence. Later in 1974, he guided a newspaper to a letter he had hidden inside a book at the Wichita Public Library, a letter claiming the Otero murders in detail that only the killer could have known. And in it, he gave himself a name, a title he wanted the papers to print. It described exactly what he did to people: bind them, torture them, kill them. B.T.K. Over the years that followed, he kept writing. To the newspapers, to the television stations. Letters, poems, packages, sketches, small trophies taken from the dead, sent out into the world like a man submitting his work and waiting for a review. In those messages, he wrote about a force inside himself that he called Factor X, his own private name for whatever he believed drove him. He called his victims his projects, and he stalked them for weeks, learning their routines before he ever moved. He was not only killing people, he was performing, and he needed an audience. That hunger to be acknowledged was the one crack in an otherwise careful and disciplined man. And 3 decades later, it would be the exact thing that destroyed him. Because behind the name were real people, and they deserve more than a body count. In April of 1974, only months after the Oteros, he forced his way into the home of 21-year-old Catherine Bright. Her brother Kevin was there, and for the first time, something went wrong for Rader. Kevin fought back. He was shot twice, and against every odd, he survived and lived to describe the calm, methodical stranger who had done this. Catherine did not survive. In March of 1977, he entered the home of Shirley VIII, a mother of 3. He locked her young children in the bathroom, and he killed her while they were only feet away. She had not been his target that day. He had gone looking for someone else, could not find them, and simply chose another house, another life, almost at random. That December, he broke into the home of 25-year-old Nancy Fox and killed her. And then he did something that tells you everything about him. He walked to a payphone and called the police himself in a flat, calm voice to report where they would find her body. He wanted them to know it was him. In 1985, he murdered Maureen Hedge, a woman who lived just down his own street, a neighbor. And in a detail that would echo years later, he carried her body to the very church where he served as a leader. In 1986, he killed Vicky Wegerle, a young mother and pianist, talking his way inside by posing as a telephone repairman in a hard hat, holding a company manual so she would not be afraid to open the door. For years, her murder was not even connected to BTK. And in 1991, he killed his 10th known victim, 62-year-old Dolores Davis. 10 people, chosen because they were reachable, watched, and unsuspecting. And because he so rarely had any real connection to them, the investigation kept hitting the same wall. There was no relationship to trace, no motive that led anywhere. A whole city learned to fear the ordinary, the repairman, the meter reader, the polite man at the door, never once guessing that the thing they feared was exactly that ordinary. Even as an entire city learned to fear him, killing was never quite enough for Dennis Rader. What he wanted, more than anything, was to be known for it. In February of 1978, furious that he was not getting the attention he felt he deserved, he sent a letter to a Wichita television station, claiming the murders and demanding his place in the story. He asked them in writing a question that says everything about him. "How many do I have to kill," he wrote, "before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" He was not confessing out of guilt. He was complaining about his reviews. In the same period, he mailed out poems about the people he had killed, twisted little verses with their names in the titles, sent to newspapers as though they were submissions to an editor. He wanted a byline. He wanted the public to use the name he had built for himself, and he was angry that the world was not yet frightened enough. And he was patient in a way that is genuinely chilling. In 1979, he chose a 63-year-old woman, studied her routine, and let himself into her empty home to wait for her. He sat in the dark for hours, but that night she happened to stay out late, changed her plans, and never walked through the door. Not knowing how close she had come, she lived. When Rader finally gave up and left, he took some of her belongings with him, and weeks later she opened her mail to find a poem from the man who had been waiting inside her house, describing what he had meant to do. That was the machinery underneath the ordinary man. Not rage, not impulse, patience, preparation, and a bottomless need to be recognized. For the police, he was a nightmare with no handle on it. They built a task force. They ran down thousands of tips. They sifted through letters, some real, some from cruel hoaxers pretending to be him, trying to tell the genuine monster from the imitators. They built psychological profiles, and many of them were wrong, describing a loner, an outsider, a man who could not hold down a job or a marriage, when the truth was the exact opposite. He was a family man. He was employed. He was respectable. Everything the profile said to look for pointed away from him. And Wichita lived inside that fear for years. Parents walked their children to and from school. Locksmiths could not keep up with the demand. Women took self-defense classes and slept with the lights on. A whole city double-checked its windows every night, afraid of a man who might be anyone, and who, it turned out, really could have been almost anyone, because he was one of them. He would go silent for years at a stretch. But the need never left him, and decades later, it would be the thing that walked him straight into the hands of the people hunting him. And then he seemed to vanish. After his early flood of letters, the communication slowed and then stopped. The killings, as far as anyone knew, stopped too. Years went by. A decade went by. Detectives who had spent their careers on this case retired without an answer. Younger officers inherited a stack of cold files and a name with no face attached to it. Many people came to believe that BTK was simply gone, that he had died, or been locked up somewhere for something else, or moved away. The city slowly, cautiously, let out a breath it had been holding for years. 13 years after his final known murder, Dennis Rader was still there, in Wichita, living an unremarkable life, standing up in church council meetings, coaching scouts, enforcing law and ordinances, and no one had the faintest idea who was sitting among them. What finally undid him was not a detective or a new piece of evidence. It was his own ego, and he handed himself in with his own two hands. In early 2004, around the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders, a local newspaper ran a look back at the case and raised the possibility that the still unknown BTK was dead or long gone. For a man whose entire secret identity was built on being the one who could never be caught, being forgotten was unbearable. He wanted the credit. So in March of 2004, after 13 years of silence, a letter arrived at the Wichita Eagle, signed with a made-up name whose initials were B.T.K. Inside were photographs of Vicki Wegerle and a copy of her driver's license, taken from the scene of a murder the police had never even attributed to him. It was proof. BTK was alive, and he was back. And then he could not stop. Over the following months, he sent a stream of communications, each one a fresh piece of evidence handed straight to the police. A package taped to a stop sign describing the Otero murders. Packages left in parks and dropped in the back of pickup trucks. Word puzzles and cryptic clues. Chapters of an autobiography he wanted the world to read. Trophies from his victims. He was playing a game with the lead investigator, Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, who answered him carefully through press conferences, feeding his pride, keeping him talking. Because every time he reached out, he gave them a little more. And Rader, convinced he was smarter than all of them, kept coming back to the table. And then he asked the question that ended it. In one of his messages, Rader wanted to know something technical. If he saved his writing onto a computer floppy disk and sent it in, could it be traced back to him? He asked the police to answer him, and told them how. If it was safe, they should place a message in the newspaper. After 30 years of taunting the people hunting him, he was now asking them for reassurance, and he fully intended to believe whatever they said. The police answered him the way he had always demanded to be answered, in public. They ran a short classified ad in the Wichita Eagle. It read, "Rex, it will be okay. It was a lie." It was, without question, the most important lie in the entire history of the case. And Dennis Rader believed it. In February of 2005, he put a purple floppy disk in the mail. That disk was the end of him, though not in the way people sometimes imagine. The disk was not a confession. It was a thread to pull. Rader sent it to a local television station, certain he had covered his tracks. But when investigators examined it, they found a document he thought he had deleted, and buried inside it was metadata, the small, invisible record a computer keeps of the files it makes, of who last saved them and where. That record pointed to two things. The file had last been used by someone named Dennis, and it was tied to a computer at Christ Lutheran Church. It took almost no time from there. A quick look at the church's website named the president of its council, Dennis Rader. But the police did not arrest a man on a first name and a line of metadata. The disk gave them a suspect, not a case, so they watched him. And to be certain, beyond any doubt, investigators quietly obtained a DNA sample connected to Rader's own daughter from a medical record and compared it to genetic evidence left behind at the crime scenes decades before. It was a familial match. The science confirmed what the disk had only suggested. The man who had taunted an entire city for 30 years had, in the end, mailed them his own name, and his own blood answered for the rest. On February 25, 2005, police stopped Dennis Rader close to his home in Park City and arrested him. There was no dramatic standoff. The compliance officer, the Cub Scout leader, the president of the church council was BTK, and it was over. And what he said in the days that followed says everything about him. He was not haunted by guilt. He was offended. He complained to the very detective who had run him down that the police had lied to him, that they had promised the floppy disk could not be traced. After 3 decades of lying to a whole city, of murdering people who had trusted a stranger at their door, the thing that truly wounded Dennis Rader was that someone had lied to him. What came next was, in its own cold way, the most chilling part of the entire case. In June of 2005, Rader pleaded guilty. There was no trial because he stood up in a courtroom and calmly narrated his own crimes, one after another, in a flat, procedural monotone, as if he were reading a maintenance report. He used the vocabulary he had built to keep the horror at a distance. Projects, hits, Factor X. He explained how he had chosen and stalked and killed human beings the way a man might explain a filing system, without rage and without a trace of remorse. He had finally been handed the audience he wanted, and he used it to describe the worst things a person can do as if they were errands. At his sentencing that August, the families of the people he had killed stood up and faced him, and told him exactly what he had taken from them. He answered with a long, rambling, self-pitying statement, comparing himself to others, thanking people, performing to the very last. Because his crimes came before Kansas had a death penalty available for them, he could not be executed. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, a minimum of 175 years, with no possibility of parole. He will die in prison, And before the end, it is worth stopping on who this was really about. Not the letters, not the name he gave himself, not the puzzles or the packages or the game. 10 people, each one a whole life he decided he had the right to end. Joseph Otero, Julie Otero, Josephine Otero, Joseph Otero Jr., Catherine Bright, Shirley Vian, Nancy Fox, Maureen Hedge, Vicky Wegerle, Dolores Davis. Those are the names that deserve to outlast his. And there is one more part of this that is easy to miss. When Dennis Rader was arrested, he did not just end his own story. He detonated a family. His wife of more than 30 years was granted an emergency divorce, having lived beside this man, raised children with him, and never known. His daughter learned as an adult that the father who had walked with her down ordinary streets was the monster her city had feared her whole life, and that it was a sample of her own DNA that helped confirm it. Whole families of the victims had waited 30 years for an answer, and when it finally came, it was not a stranger from far away. It was a church-going neighbor, a man who had sat on committees and led scouts and enforced the rules. That is the part BTK never understood about his own story. He thought he was the author of it, but the people who actually had to live inside the wreckage were everyone else. Dennis Rader spent 3 decades trying to prove that he was smarter than the police. That was the entire point of the letters, the name, the taunts, the game he could not stop playing. In the end, they did not force him into a mistake. They did not corner him, or break him, or outthink him. They simply answered one question he never should have asked, and his own need to keep talking did the rest. He was not a mastermind. He was a rigid, self-important man with a monstrous secret and a bottomless hunger to be seen. And the one thing he wanted most in the world, attention, was the thing that finally handed him over. He wanted to be remembered as the one who got away. Instead, he will be remembered as the one who could not stay quiet. And the names worth remembering were never his. New files open every week. Some stay sealed. Subscribe and follow the archive for the next one.